The train groaned, a long sigh of metal against metal, finally surrendering to the biting cold of Cauldron Creek. Steam plumed from the engine, freezing instantly into a cloud of ice crystals that settled on the weathered platform. The sky was a hard, flat gray, promising more snow by nightfall. Cora Sutton stood alone, the last one to step down, her hand-me-down coat. A dull brown wool that had belonged to a woman larger and luckier than her did little to stop the wind. It found every gap, stinging her cheeks and sliding icy fingers down her neck. She clutched her single valise, its leather cracked and its handle worn smooth. Inside was everything she owned: 2 dresses, a worn Bible, and a tin of sewing needles. She was 24, but the orphanage and the shame had carved years into her face. This was a mistake, a terrible, cruel mistake that had simply traveled further than its origins. The letter had not been her idea. It had been Lucy and Martha, back at the orphanage in St. Louis, their faces pinched with mean-spirited glee. Let's see who'd answer for a barren bride. Cora. They had laughed as they wrote the advertisement for the Matrimonial Times, describing her as plain but strong and willing. They had forged her name, pooled their laundry pennies, and sent it. Cora had only found out when the reply came. A man named Eli McCrae, from a place she had never heard of, had accepted. The girls had expected her to weep, to throw the letter in the fire. But Cora, who had known nothing but gray walls and the quiet judgment of the matrons, saw not a prank, but an answer. It was a single, terrifying door opening out of a room that had no others. So she had taken the meager savings she had hidden beneath her cot, bought a one-way ticket, and fled. Now, she stood on the platform, her hope dwindling as fast as the warmth in her feet. The town was little more than a muddy street clawed from the wilderness, bracketed by grim, false-fronted buildings. This was not a place of beginnings, it was a place of endings. A woman in a severe black dress, Mrs. Hobbs, the telegraph operator and unofficial matchmaker, was checking her clipboard. She looked up, her gaze landing on Cora with a mixture of pity and impatience. Miss Sutton. Cora nodded, unable to find her voice. He is here, Mrs. Hobbs said, gesturing not toward the station house, but to a tall figure standing near a buckboard wagon. He was a wall of a man, Eli McCrae, even from a distance. He looked carved from the same hard, unforgiving landscape as the mountains that loomed behind the town. He wore a heavy shearling coat, its collar turned up against the wind. He did not move, did not wave, did not even nod. He just watched. Cora's feet felt like lead as she followed Mrs. Hobbs. As she drew closer, she saw him clearly. He was broad-shouldered, as his letter had stated, but the words had not prepared her for the severity of his presence. His dark hair was shaggy, touching the collar of his coat. His face was weathered, browned by sun and wind, but it was the scar that held her attention. A pale, jagged line ran from his left temple down across his cheek, ending just at the hard line of his jaw. It pulled the skin tight, giving him a permanent, unnerving squint. He looked, Cora thought, like a man who had been in a fight with something much larger than himself, and had only barely won. Mr. McCrae. Mrs. Hobbs said, her voice straining to sound cheerful. This is Miss Cora Sutton, arrived as scheduled. Eli McCrae's gaze dropped to Cora. He looked her up and down. Once, it was not the look of a groom, eager or otherwise. It was the assessment of a farmer checking new livestock. He seemed to measure her thin frame, the worn coat, the chapped hands clutching the bag. He must have seen the fear in her eyes. He gave no sign. His eyes, she saw, were a deep, cold blue, as gray as the winter sky. He turned his gaze from Cora to Mrs. Hobbs. Without a word, he reached into the pocket of his trousers. He did not produce a wallet. He did not produce a pouch. He brought out a single, dull silver dollar. He pressed it into Mrs. Hobbs's gloved hand. Cora felt the air leave her lungs, as if she had been struck. $1, the price of a broken tool, a lame mule, the final, humiliating punctuation to the joke. Mrs. Hobbs, to her credit, looked embarrassed. "Well, the fee is paid. Mr. McCrae, Miss Sutton, the papers are filed at the courthouse. I wish you well." She scurried back into the warmth of the station house, leaving Cora alone on the platform with the scarred man and the single, echoing price of her life. Eli McCrae finally spoke. His voice was a low rumble, rough as gravel. "The wagon is here." He did not offer to take her bag. He simply turned and walked toward it. Cora, her body numb, her mind screaming, followed. She put her bag in the back and used the wheel spoke to haul herself up onto the hard wooden bench. He climbed up beside her, the bench groaning under his weight. He smelled of pine, cold air, and something metallic, like old iron. He snapped the reins, and the two heavy draft horses pulled the wagon into the muddy rut of the main street. The town, small as it was, had eyes. As they passed the general store, a cluster of men in heavy coats stopped talking to watch them. They did not hide their stares. Cora saw one of them lean toward another, his mouth moving. The words were carried on the wind, sharp and clear. "That's McCrae, and that's the one." "The dollar bride?" Another voice, incredulous. A rough laugh. "Heard she has damaged goods, barren as a stone." $8 seems steep. He cannot get nothing from her. No sons, no family. Cora's face burned hot, then cold. She hunched her shoulders, pulling the thin coat tight, as if she could disappear inside it. Barren, damaged, useless. The words had followed her since she was 17, since the grim-faced doctor at the county hospital had examined her after a brutal fever. "A flaw in your design, Miss Sutton," he had said. Not unkindly. "The fever has scarred you inside. You will not carry children." The matron at the orphanage had been more blunt. "You will have to work twice as hard to be worth half as much. No man takes a wife who cannot give him a family." Now, the entire town knew. The gossip had traveled faster than the train. Her shame was a physical thing. A second, heavier coat she could not take off. Eli McCrae gave no sign he had heard. He kept his eyes fixed forward, his scarred face impassive. He did not defend her. He did not curse them. He simply drove on, as if the voices were just part of the wind. The wagon left the town behind, climbing a steep, rocky track that led into the high country. The wind grew stronger here, a constant, mournful howl that swept down from the snow-covered peaks. The valley they entered was breathtaking and brutal. Towering walls of gray rock rose on either side, their crevices filled with snow. The floor of the valley was covered in brittle pine trees, their branches bent and twisted by the relentless gales. The land was stark, stripped down to its bones, beautiful in its sheer, terrifying honesty. There was no color here, only shades of white, gray, and the dark green of the pines. It was the loneliest place Cora had ever seen. After an hour of silence, the wagon crested a low rise. Below, hunkered down against the slope of the valley wall, was the ranch. It was not a ranch. It was a cabin. It was a small, mean-looking structure of sod and rough-hewn logs, with a low, slanting roof that looked heavy with dirt and snow. A plume of thin gray smoke trickled from a stone chimney. Beside it stood a dilapidated barn, its wood bleached gray, and a small, fenced-in corral that held no animals. This was his home. This was her prison. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop near the cabin door. He got down and began unhitching the horses, his movements economical and sure. Cora sat frozen on the bench, her legs too weak to move. He finished with the horses and turned to her. He just waited, his expression unreadable. "Mr. McCrae," Cora said, her voice small and tight. She finally found the courage to meet his eyes. I I know why the price was what it was. I know my condition. I am a hard worker. I can clean, I can mend, I can sleep in the barn. I do not mind the cold. She would not be a burden. She would be a servant. That, at least, she understood. Eli looked at her for a long moment. The wind whipped a strand of her mousy brown hair across her face, and she pushed it back with a trembling, chapped hand. "The barn is for animals," he said, his voice flat. "You will freeze before morning." He nodded toward the cabin. "You will take the bed." Cora frowned, confused. "But where will you—" He picked up her valise, his large, scarred hand swallowing the handle. He walked to the door and pushed it open, not waiting for her. "I sleep on the cot. This is not a marriage of affection. Ma'am, I need help. The winter is long. The cattle are in the high pasture. They need to be brought down. The fences are down in the east draw. I need another pair of hands to survive until spring. That is all I paid for." He dropped her bag inside the door and walked away, leading the horses toward the barn. Cora stood by the wagon, the wind tearing at her. He had not bought a wife. He had bought a laborer. The relief was so sharp it almost made her dizzy, but it was followed by the familiar, dull ache of her own worthlessness. She was not a woman. She was just hands. She took a deep breath of the freezing air and stepped inside the cabin. It was one room, dark and surprisingly warm. A small pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated a fierce heat. The air smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and stale coffee. It was meticulously clean, but utterly without comfort. There was a rough-spun cot against one wall, piled with heavy blankets. Against the far wall was a larger bed, a simple frame of stripped pine logs, covered with a thick patchwork quilt. A crude table and 2 chairs sat near the stove. A set of shelves held a few tin plates, some sacks of flour and beans, and a small, well-read Bible next to a worn copy of Shakespeare. This was a space built for survival, not living. Cora, still wearing her coat, set about trying to be useful. She saw a side of salt pork and a knife on the counter. She would make dinner. She had cooked at the orphanage, simple gruel and hard bread. She could do this. She could not. The salt pork was tougher than any meat she had ever handled. She hacked at it, the knife clumsy in her cold, reddened hands. When she tried to fry it in the heavy iron skillet, the fat smoked and burned, filling the cabin with a bitter, acrid smell. She tried to make biscuits, but her dough was a watery, gray paste. She put them in the small stove oven anyway, and they emerged as charred, dense rocks. Eli returned as dusk was falling. He came in silently, bringing a gust of Arctic air with him. He stamped the snow from his boots and hung his heavy coat on a peg. He looked at the smoking skillet, at the burned rocks on the table. Cora's face flushed with shame. I am sorry. I burned it." He did not reply. He walked to the table, picked up one of the biscuits, and broke it in half with a crack. He put a piece in his mouth, chewed, and swallowed. He then took a plate, scraped the least burned pieces of pork onto it, and sat down. He ate the entire meal without a word, his gaze fixed on the table. The silence was louder than any scolding. After she tried to mend, he had tossed a heavy canvas work coat onto the cot, its sleeve nearly torn off. Cora sat by the fire, her hands trembling. The orphanage had taught her to darn socks and hem dresses, not to repair fabric that felt as thick as tree bark. The heavy needle was an alien tool in her fingers. She pushed, and the needle slipped, sinking deep into the pad of her thumb. She gasped, pulling it out. A bright, perfect drop of her own blood welled up. It splashed onto the canvas, a tiny red stain. Her eyes stung. Useless, useless, useless. She was failing at the one thing she promised she could do. The frustration and shame were a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. She bit her lip until she tasted salt. She would not cry. She would not cry in front of this silent, scarred man. She sucked the blood from her thumb, rethreaded the needle in the dim firelight, and began to sew again, her stitches small, ugly, and tight. Later, the cabin was dark. Cora lay in the large bed, fully clothed beneath the heavy quilts. The wind outside had risen to a shriek, a living thing clawing at the log walls. Eli lay on the cot across the room, a dark shape. She thought he was asleep. She must have dozed, because the sound ripped her awake. It was a scream. Not a shout, but a raw, tearing sound of pure agony that did not sound human. Cora bolted upright, her heart seizing in her chest. What is it? In the moonlight filtering through the single ice-rimed window, she saw him. Eli was fighting the blankets. His body arched off the cot. "No!" he yelled, his voice thick with sleep and terror. "Sarah, run! Get the boy!" He thrashed, one arm flinging out, his hand grasping at the empty air. Not him! God, no! Cora clamped a hand over her own mouth, her terror immediate. She thought they were being attacked, but he was not awake. He was trapped in a place she could not see. I will kill you," he choked out, a low, animalistic growl. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. He woke himself with a shuddering gasp that rattled the small room. He sat bolt upright, his breathing harsh and ragged. He was staring, not at her, but through her, at the dark wall beyond. His face, illuminated by the moon, was a mask of sweat and torment. The scar stood out, a livid white slash. Cora dared not breathe. He did not look at her. He did not acknowledge her presence. He swung his legs off the cot, his bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor with a soft thud. He walked to the stove, opened the hatch, and mechanically stirred the embers. He added a single, small log. Then he sat in one of the wooden chairs, his back to her, and simply stared into the fire's orange glow. Cora lay back down, pulling the quilts to her chin. She did not sleep. She listened to the sound of the wind and the sound of the man's ragged breathing, two broken sounds in the dark. She learned about them the next day. Eli was gone before dawn, checking traps he had set in the valley. The snow had stopped, and a weak sun was trying to break through the clouds. Cora, needing to escape the suffocating closeness of the cabin, bundled in her coat and walked. Behind the cabin, nestled in a small stand of pines that offered the only protection from the wind, she found them. 2 graves. They were marked by simple wooden crosses, weathered gray by the seasons. The carving was rough, clearly done by an unsteady hand. The first read, Sarah McCrae, beloved wife, died 1881. The second, smaller mound beside it read, Thomas McCrae, beloved son, died 1881. They had died on the same day, 5 years ago. Sarah, run! Get the boy! The nightmare, the scar, the cabin built only for survival. It all slammed into her. He had not just lost a family. He had watched them be taken, slaughtered by raiders, as the gossip from the train platform now seemed to imply. He was not just a widower. He was a survivor. She understood. He had not bought her to replace what he had lost. He had bought her because she was empty. He had sought out a barren woman because the thought of having another child, another wife to love and lose, was more than his scarred heart could bear. A wife who could give him nothing was the only kind of wife he could stand. They lived like ghosts for the next week. The silence in the cabin was a thick, heavy blanket. They worked. He would leave in the dark and return in the dark, his face rimmed with ice, his hands raw. He would bring back rabbits or a side of venison, and she would cook. Her cooking did not improve, but she learned to burn it less. She cleaned the cabin until the wooden floors shone. She repaired his clothes, her stitches still ugly but strong. They did not speak, they did not touch, they did not even meet each other's eyes. They were 2 broken people, existing in the same small space, bound by a dollar and the howl of the wind. One morning, the cold was sharper than usual. The water in the basin was a solid block of ice. Cora had been up for an hour, feeding the stove, her breath pluming in the dim light. She had coffee boiling, one of the few things she had learned to make that satisfied him. Eli rose from the cot. He sat on the edge, pulling on his heavy wool socks, his movements stiff from the cold. He ran a hand over his face, his beard rough. He looked exhausted, haunted. Usually, she would leave the pot on the stove, and he would get it himself. But today, she did something different. She poured the steaming black coffee into his tin mug. She walked across the small room. He did not look up, his head bent as he wrestled with his stiff leather boots. She stopped in front of him. He did not move. She held out the cup. He froze. Slowly, his head lifted. His cold blue eyes met hers. He looked at her face, then down at the cup she was offering. He seemed confused by the simple gesture. He hesitated, then reached out. His large, scarred fingers brushed hers as he took the mug. The touch was electric, a tiny, shocking spark in the frozen room. It was the first time their skin had met. Cora pulled her hand back as if burned. He looked down into the steaming mug. He wrapped his hands around it, seeking its warmth. He did not drink. He cleared his throat, his voice a low rasp. "Thank you." He did not look at her when he said it. He spoke it to the coffee, to the floor, to the fire, but he said it. Cora just nodded, her throat suddenly tight. She retreated to the far side of the stove, turning her back to him, her heart hammering a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. It was only 2 words. It was not kindness. It was not acceptance. But it was the first warmth she had known in years. The valley became a tomb of white. November bled into December, and the wind that had howled before now settled into a permanent, high-pitched scream. It came from the north, a solid wall of ice and air that never stopped. The brittle pine trees looked like skeletons dipped in glass. Snow piled in great drifts against the cabin, burying the single window on the north wall and climbing halfway up the door. Each morning began with Eli opening it, shoving against a solid foot of new powder that had fallen in the night. Their world shrank to the 4 log walls of the cabin, the path to the barn, and the line of traps Eli set in the woods. Supplies, which had seemed adequate, began to dwindle with frightening speed. The sacks of flour and cornmeal grew lighter. The coffee was rationed to 1 cup in the morning. The grounds boiled twice until they were just brown water. The salt pork was gone. They ate rabbit, stringy and lean, and the venison Eli had shot before the deep snow. Every bite was fuel. Nothing more. In this crucible, Cora changed. The cold, which at first had seemed an enemy, was now just a fact. The wind was a companion. The chores that had baffled her became her armor. She woke before Eli, her hands no longer soft and clumsy. They were red, raw, and cracked, but they were strong. She fed the stove, her movements quick and sure, stacking the wood just right to get the most heat from the least fuel. She learned to haul the heavy water buckets from the hole Eli kept open in the frozen creek, the yoke biting into her shoulders. But she did not spill a drop. She learned to butcher the rabbits he brought in, the work grim but necessary. She no longer cut herself. Her hands were steady as she worked the knife, separating meat from bone, hide from muscle. She learned to scrape the hides, her stomach no longer turning, her mind focused on the pair of mittens the fur would become. She took his torn canvas coat, the one she had bled on, and with a heavy-duty needle and waxed thread from his supply box, she stitched it not with small, ugly stitches, but with a strong, solid seam that would hold against the wind. He watched her. He never spoke, never offered a word of praise, but she felt his eyes on her. When she hauled in a load of firewood that would have strained a man, he would pause in sharpening his axe, his cold blue gaze resting on her for a moment before he turned back to the stone. He was still grieving. She knew. He was a man surrounded by the ghosts of his wife and son, and he was terrified to make room for a new, living person. He was afraid to want, afraid to need anything that could be taken from him again. The true test came during a gray, suffocating afternoon when the snow fell so thick it was like a curtain. A low, pained bawl came from the barn. One of the cows, gaunt from the poor winter feed, was in labor. Eli was gone, checking a trap line miles up the valley. He would not be back before dark. Cora pulled on his heavy shearling coat over her own, wrapped a scarf over her face, and plunged into the whiteout. She fought her way to the barn, the wind stealing her breath. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of hay and animal fear. The cow was down on her side, her eyes wild, her breathing a ragged bellow. Cora saw the problem instantly. The calf was breech. Only 2 hooves were showing, and they were pointing the wrong way. She knew what would happen. The mother would die. The calf would die. They would lose precious meat and a future milk cow. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not today." She remembered watching the stable hands at the orphanage helping a mare. She washed her hands in the icy water bucket, scrubbing them raw, then covered her arms in lard. She spoke to the cow, her voice low and steady, the same voice she used on herself when she wanted to cry. "Easy, girl, easy. Now, I am here." She reached inside, into the heat and panic of the animal. Her hands, trembling with the effort and the alien intimacy of it, found the calf. She pushed, turned, her muscles screaming, the cow bellowing in a wave of agony. Cora gritted her teeth, tears of sheer effort freezing on her eyelashes. She pulled, aligning the calf, her entire body braced against the barn wall. For an hour, she fought, finally, with a great, slick rush. The calf came free. It was limp, a small, wet pile on the hay. "Breathe," Cora commanded, wiping the slickness from its nose. "Breathe, confound you." She rubbed its chest with a rough burlap sack, hard, until her own arms ached. The small body shivered. It gave a weak, sputtering cough. And then, miraculously, it took its first gulp of air. The mother cow, exhausted, lifted her head to lick her child. Cora sat back in the hay, covered in blood and sweat, shaking so hard she could barely stand. She had done it. She had saved them. When Eli returned, he found her in the cabin, asleep in the chair by the stove, her clothes still damp. He said nothing, but he left the barn and returned to the cabin. He ladled a cup of water and set it on the table near her head. He looked at her hands, resting in her lap. They were clean, but the skin around her nails was dark with dried blood. He looked at her face, pale and exhausted, and his expression, for a moment, was unreadable. 2 weeks later, the flour was gone. The blizzard had not let up, but the worst of it had passed, leaving behind a brittle, sun-drenched cold that bit at the lungs. "We have to go to town," Eli said. It was not a question. The ride to Cauldron Creek was brutal. They sat side by side on the buckboard, wrapped in every blanket they owned. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the squeak of the wagon axles. The town felt impossibly loud, impossibly full of people. Fuller's general store was crowded, the pot-bellied stove in the center radiating a heat that made Cora feel faint. Men leaned against the counter, their talk low. Women in heavy shawls congregated near the bolts of fabric, their voices a low, gossiping hum. Eli handed his list to Mr. Fuller, his voice flat. "Flour, lard, coffee, salt." As Eli counted out the coins, Cora drifted, drawn by the simple desire for a different sound, a different smell. She lingered near the fabric, pretending to admire a bolt of blue calico. The voices of the women cut through the air, sharp and clear. "Look, it's her," a woman whispered, her voice like scraping ice. It was Mrs. Davies, the Smith's wife, McCrae's dollar bride. Shameful, another voice replied. "Dragging that poor man down? He's had enough misery." "And for what, Mrs.?" Davies said, not bothering to lower her voice. "He's feeding a mouth that gives him nothing in return. A dried-up bride. Heard she's barren as a winter field. It is unnatural, is what it is." "He's lost his mind," the other woman clucked. "Paying good money for a waste of space. She's a barren mule, good for nothing but work, and she does not even look that strong." Cora froze. Waste of space, barren mule. The words hit her harder than a physical blow. She had been working, hauling, saving his livestock. She was not useless, but to them her worth was tied only to her womb, and hers was empty. The old, familiar shame, which had receded in the face of survival, rushed back, cold and suffocating. She saw Eli stiffen. He had heard. He finished paying Mr. Fuller, his movements deliberate. He did not look at the women. He did not look at Cora. He picked up the heavy sack of flour as if it were a feather. "We go," he said. The ride back to the valley was worse than the ride in. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the poison of the women's words. Cora stared at the rigid line of Eli's back, at the scar on his cheek. He had not defended her. He had not said a word. He had let them call her a mule, a waste. They arrived back at the cabin. Eli began to unhitch the horses. Cora, instead of grabbing the supplies, stood in the snow, her small valise in her hand. "Cora," he said, his voice impatient. "Get inside. It is cold." "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice shaking, but low and fierce. He stopped, turning to face her. "Do what?" "Why did you buy me?" she demanded, the words tearing out of her. "You heard them. They are right. I am broken. I am a barren field. I cannot give you a son. I cannot give you anything. So why? Why pay even $1 for me if I am broken?" He stood there for a long time, the wind pulling at his coat. The horses snorted, their breath pluming in the air. He looked at her, his eyes traveling over her face, as if seeing her for the first time. The anger in her, the fire. It was new. He turned his gaze toward the 2 small graves behind the cabin, barely visible mounds under the snow. "I bought you," he said, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "Because I am broken, too." He did not elaborate. He did not have to. He finished with the horses and led them to the barn, leaving her standing in the snow, the weight of his words settling over her. "Because I'm broken, too." It was not an accusation. It was a confession, an alliance. That night, she found a small, leather-bound ledger in the bottom of a crate, filled with blank, yellowed pages. It must have been his, or perhaps Sarah's. It was empty. By the low light of the fire, after Eli was asleep, she opened it. She dipped the pen in the small pot of ink and she began to write. She did not write about the cold, or the ranch, or Eli. She wrote letters to the children she would never have. "My dearest child," she wrote, her hand cramping. "Today I saw a calf born. It was a miracle of wet, shivering life. I held him and I thought of you. I wonder if you would have had your father's eyes. I wonder if you would have been strong. I would have sung you songs. I would have kept you warm. I am sorry I will never know you. I am sorry I am not whole." She wrote until the fire burned low, then hid the book under her mattress. A secret testament to the love that filled her, with no place to go. The brutal cold finally broke in late January, replaced by a thaw that was almost as dangerous. The creek swelled, and the snow on the roof of the cabin began to melt, dripping in a steady rhythm. The air felt heavy, damp, and almost warm. For one afternoon, the sun was bright. The cabin felt suffocating. "I need to wash," Cora announced. It was not a request. Eli nodded, his eyes on the rifle he was cleaning. "The creek is high. Be careful." She took a bar of lye soap and a towel and walked to the sheltered bend in the creek. It was madness to bathe in winter, but she could not stand the smell of sweat, smoke, and salt pork on her skin for one more day. She found a spot shielded by high boulders, where the water pooled. She broke a thin layer of ice at the edge and winced as she dipped her hands in. It was numbing, agonizingly cold. She worked fast, stripping off her wool dress and undergarments, her skin prickling in the frigid air. She was pale and thin, but no longer the weakling who had arrived. Her shoulders had definition, her arms were roped with new muscle. She stepped into the water up to her knees, gasping, and began to wash, scrubbing her skin until it was bright red. A twig snapped on the path above her. Cora spun around, clutching the towel to her chest. Eli. He stood there, his axe in his hand, on his way to check a deadfall. He had seen her. Her face flooded with heat, a shame deeper than any she had felt in the store. He was seeing her naked, exposed, her broken body on display. But Eli did not look. He did not stare. He did not leer. The moment he saw her, his eyes snapped away. He physically turned his back to her. A sharp, deliberate movement. "My apologies, ma'am," he said, his voice directed at a pine tree. "I did not. I will go the other way." He disappeared back up the path without a backward glance. Cora stood in the freezing water, her heart hammering. He had turned away. He had given her privacy. He had not looked at her like a livestock, like a barren mule, like a piece of property he had bought for $1. He had looked at her, or rather not looked at her, like a person, like a woman. She finished washing, her hands shaking, but not from the cold. As she dressed, she felt something strange stir in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for years. It was not just gratitude. It was a feeling of profound, aching safety, and hidden deep within it, small and terrifying, was the first, fragile spark of desire. The thaw was a false promise. February brought the true blizzard. It came without warning, a wall of gray moving down the valley, swallowing the mountains. The wind did not howl. It shrieked, a deafening, maddening sound that vibrated in the logs of the cabin. For 3 days, the sun vanished. The world became a churning vortex of white. They were trapped. "The wood," Eli said on the first day, his voice tight. "I need to get more." He fought his way to the woodpile, a rope tied around his waist, the other end tied to the door latch, so he would not get lost in the whiteout. He came back an hour later, his beard a solid block of ice, dragging a load of wood that was not enough. By the second day, they were starving. The cabin was a block of ice. They huddled by the stove, feeding it precious sticks, their blankets wrapped around them. The wind found every crack, sending knives of cold into the room. "Cora," Eli mumbled, his voice thick. "The fire needs—" He was already ill. The trip for the wood had taken too much. A cough had settled deep in his chest. On the third day, the wind was still screaming, but Eli had stopped coughing. He lay on his cot, his breathing shallow, his skin a strange, gray color. Cora touched his forehead. He was burning. "Eli," she said, shaking him. He did not respond. A new terror, sharper than the cold, seized her. He was collapsing. He was giving up. "No," she said, the word a command. "You do not get to die." She hauled him from the cot, half dragging, half carrying his dead weight to the larger bed, which was closer to the stove. She piled every blanket, every coat they owned. On top of him, he began to shiver, a violent bone-rattling shudder that shook the bed frame. She fed the stove. Sacrificing the wood meant for morning. She melted snow in the kettle, forcing lukewarm water between his chapped lips. For hours, she fought. She bathed his face, her hands gentle. In his delirium, he was not the silent, scarred rancher. He was a terrified man. She tended to his body, her movements practical, not shy. She saw the old scars she had only glimpsed before, a puckered white circle on his shoulder where a bullet had gone in. Rope burns on his wrists, old and faded, from a time she could not imagine, and the scar on his face, livid against his flushed skin. Night fell, but the blizzard raged. The cabin was a tiny, fragile ship in a howling ocean of white. Eli began to weep, not the loud sobs of a conscious man, but a leaking, desperate, broken sound. "Anna," he whispered, his eyes squeezed shut. "Anna, run, please, baby, get behind your mother." He was not calling for his wife. He was calling for his daughter. "They are the fire. God, no." His hand, which she had seen split logs, clenched the quilt, his knuckles white. "Anna!" Cora's heart broke. The grief in the room was a physical thing, thicker than the cold. She leaned over him, her own tears blurring her vision. She put her hand on his scarred cheek. She pressed her lips to his burning forehead, a gesture of pure, unthinking comfort. "Shh," she whispered, her voice thick. "I am not her, Eli. I am not Anna, but I am here. I am here." She sat with him all night, holding his hand, bathing his face, whispering the same words over and over. "I am here." Sometime before dawn, the fever broke. His shivering stopped. His breathing deepened, becoming the slow, regular breath of true sleep. The wind, as if exhausted, finally died down, leaving an echoing, profound silence. Cora, her body aching with fatigue, slumped in the chair beside the bed, her head resting on the edge of the mattress, her hand still loosely holding his. She woke to the feeling of pressure. She lifted her head. Gray light, the first in days, was filtering through the snow-caked window. The storm was over. Eli was awake. His eyes, clear and sane, were on her. He looked weak, ravaged, but he was there. He looked down at their hands. Her hand was resting on the quilt. He slowly, deliberately, covered it with his own, his fingers, weak but determined, wrapped around hers. Cora's breath caught. She started to pull away. His grip tightened. It was not a strong grip, but it was a deliberate one. He held her hand. He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a raw, unguarded gratitude. He did not speak. He just held on, as if she were the only thing keeping him from drifting away. And Cora, for the first time in her life, did not pull away. She let him hold her. She was not a barren mule. She was not a waste of space. She was the one who was here. The snow did not just melt. It surrendered. It gave way with a sound like a great, slow sigh. A million trickles of water running downhill, cutting new paths in the mud. The valley, which had been a stark etching of white and gray, was suddenly overwhelmed with a violent, desperate green. The air, once thin and sharp, grew thick with the smell of damp earth, crushed pine needles, and the sweet, sharp scent of sap. Life did not just return, it fought its way back. Cora and Eli fought with it. The winter had been about survival, a grim holding pattern. The spring was about work. The blizzard had scattered the remaining cattle, and the fences in the east draw, just as he had said, were a wreck of snapped posts and tangled wire. They began to work side by side, and a new language formed between them. It was not built on words, but on movement. It was in the way she anticipated the tool he needed, passing him the wire stretchers before he had to ask. It was in the way he held the post steady, his body braced, as she tamped the earth around it, her movements quick and strong. They were a two-person machine, mending the boundaries of the ranch, mending something unseen between them. She no longer felt like a burden. She felt the new, hard muscles in her arms and back, the calluses on her palms. She rode the quieter of the two draft horses, not with grace, but with a stubborn determination, herding the thin, hungry cows back from the high ridges. In the evenings, they would sit at the small table, too tired to speak, The silence no longer a heavy, suffocating blanket, but a shared comfort, like a quilt they had pieced together. He would clean his rifle, the scrape and click of the oiled metal a rhythmic sound. She would mend a tear in his shirt, her stitches now even and strong. One afternoon, while Eli was checking the high pastures, Cora took a walk. The thaw had uncovered the world. She found a patch of early wildflowers, delicate bluebells and white spring beauties, pushing up through the damp mulch of leaves. She gathered a small handful. She stood for a long time by the cabin, looking at the 2 gray crosses behind the stand of pines. The ground there was still hard, but the snow was gone. She had avoided that spot. It was his, not hers. It was the shrine to the ghosts that slept in the cot across from her, the ghosts who screamed his daughter's name in the night. She took a breath and walked over. The wind was gentle here, the pines shielding the spot. Sarah, Thomas, names she had only seen carved in wood. She knelt, her knees sinking into the damp earth. With her fingers, she dug a small hollow in the soil at the base of Sarah's cross. She poured a little water from the canteen she carried. Then she planted the flowers. She did the same for the small grave beside it. It was not a replacement. It was not an intrusion. It was just an offering, a small patch of life in a place of death. She did not know he was watching. Eli had come back down the ridge and seen her small, bent figure by the graves. He stopped his horse, his heart giving a painful, singular thud against his ribs. He watched her pat the earth with her bare hands. He watched her stand and brush the dirt from her skirt. He felt a confusion of emotions that was almost angering. He felt the old, sharp stab of loss, a jealousy that another woman would tend Sarah's grave. But beneath it was a stronger, deeper pull, a gratitude so profound it almost buckled his knees. She was not trying to erase them. She was honoring them. She was bringing color to the gray. He did not ride down. He did not speak. He turned his horse and rode back up the ridge, waiting another hour before he returned, giving her the dignity of her private act. When he finally came in for supper, he said nothing, but as he sat at the table, he looked at her hands. Clean now, but with dark crescents of valley earth still trapped beneath her fingernails. The following week, they needed supplies. The spring planting could not wait. The ride to Cauldron Creek was different. The world was alive. He pointed, just once, with a gloved finger. "Deer," he said, and she saw 3 of them, sleek and red, leaping through the new aspen leaves. The town, however, had not thawed. Mr. Fuller's general store was quiet when they entered. The pot-bellied stove was cold. The door propped open to the muddy street. Cora went to look at the sacks of seed potatoes and beans. Eli went to the counter. Mr. Fuller, a thin man with a perpetually sour expression, leaned forward, a toothpick working in the corner of his mouth. "Well, McCrae," Fuller said, his voice just loud enough for Cora to hear. "Spring is here. Season for planting, is it not?" Eli nodded, his face impassive. "Just the supplies, Fuller, and 2 sacks of flour." Fuller smiled, a thin, unpleasant stretching of his lips. He looked past Eli, his gaze landing on Cora's back. "See you kept your winter purchase. Surprised she made it? She is thin." He leaned in closer to Eli. "Tell me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, nasal whine. "Are you getting any real use out of that dollar bride? Has that barren wife of yours proven to be a woman yet? Or is she just another mouth to feed?" Cora froze. Barren. The word was a slap. She could feel the blood drain from her face. It happened faster than she could process. Eli did not speak. He did not threaten. His left hand, which had been resting on the counter, shot out and seized the front of Fuller's shirt, pulling him halfway across the pine boards. His right hand, a fist like a block of granite, struck Fuller square on the jaw. The sound was not a slap. It was a wet, solid crack. Fuller crumpled, collapsing behind the counter like a sack of feed. A woman in the back of the store screamed. Eli stood there, his chest heaving, his scarred face dark with a rage Cora had never seen. He looked, for that 1 second, like the man who screamed in his sleep. Then, the rage was gone, replaced by the same cold mask. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a handful of coins, and dropped them on the counter. They scattered, rolling near the spilled tin of tobacco. "For the supplies," he grunted. He turned to Cora, his voice flat. "Get the seed." Cora, her entire body trembling, grabbed the small sack of beans. Eli shouldered the 2 50-pound sacks of flour as if they were nothing. He did not look at the groaning shopkeeper. He did not look at the horrified woman. He grabbed Cora's arm, not gently, and pulled her out of the store. They loaded the wagon in silence and rode out of town. The rumors followed them home. They rode on the wind, spreading faster than the spring melt. A few days later, Cora had to ride near the neighboring ranch, the one owned by the Slocums, to retrieve a stray calf. Mrs. Slocum was in her yard, beating a rug. She saw Cora and immediately turned her back, hurrying inside and closing the door. When Eli rode to town alone for salt, he was met with cold shoulders. Men who had once nodded to him in passing now stared at the ground. The story had twisted. It was not that Eli had defended his wife. It was that Eli McCrae, the crazy widower, had finally lost his mind. He was so broken with grief that he was falling for a barren woman, a damaged, useless bride he had bought for $1. He was turning his back on decency, on his own past, on the memory of his real family. Cora felt the rumors like stones. She had not been the one to throw the punch, but she was the cause. She saw the way Eli's jaw was set when he came back from town, the new tension in his shoulders. She was destroying him. He had survived the raid. He had survived the winters. He had survived his grief. But he would not survive this. She was pulling him down, making him an outcast. The town would not tolerate a man who chose a broken woman over sense. They would not sell to him. They would not help him in a bad winter. She was not just ruining his reputation. She was endangering his life. She had been a joke. Now she was a poison. The decision, when it came, was simple. It was as cold and clear as the creek water. She had been bought to help him survive, and the only way to help him survive was to leave. She waited until he was gone, riding the south pasture, a job that would take him until nightfall. Her hands did not shake. She moved with the same efficiency she used to stack firewood. She packed her small valise, the hand-me-down coat, her 2 other dresses, the journal. She looked at the cabin, at the bed she had slept in, at the chair he sat in. It was the only home she had ever known. She had scrubbed its floors, cooked its meals, survived a blizzard in it. She had planted flowers behind it. She left. She did not write a note. A note would be an excuse, a plea. This was a clean cut. She walked. The 10 miles to Cauldron Creek were long. The spring mud sucked at her boots. She did not look back. She focused on the sound of her own footsteps. She reached the town in the late afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the clouds a pale, watery orange. The train station was quiet. She looked at the schedule. The eastbound train, the one that would take her back to St. Louis, back to the orphanage, back to nothing, was due at dusk. She bought a ticket with a few coins she had saved, coins she had found in the seams of the old coat. She sat on the same bench where she had first seen Eli. She pulled her coat tight and waited. She heard the horse before she saw it. A frantic, desperate pounding of hooves. A horse being ridden too hard, too fast. Eli. He burst onto the platform, his horse lathered in sweat and breathing hard. He did not dismount gracefully. He practically fell from the saddle. He was covered in mud. His hat was gone, his hair wild. He had not come for her. He had hunted her. Cora stood up, clutching her bag to her chest. She braced herself. She expected the rage she had seen in the store. She expected him to grab her, to curse her, to drag her back to the wagon. He stopped 10 feet from her, his chest heaving, fighting for air. He looked wrecked. He looked terrified. The scar on his face was pale, his blue eyes wide and filled with a panic that mirrored her own. "You left," he choked out. Cora lifted her chin. I am ruining you. Eli, you heard them. I am a waste. I am making you an outcast. You will lose your ranch. You will." "No," he said. "Yes, you will. They will not help you. You cannot survive here alone, not if they all turn on you. And they will, because of me. It is better if I am gone." The train whistle sounded in the distance, a long, mournful cry. "No," he said again, taking a step. "I cannot give you sons. Eli," she cried, the words finally tearing free, the words she had held inside for years. "I cannot give you a family. I am empty. Let me go. Please, it is the only way I can repay the $1. Eli looked at her, and the panic in his eyes was replaced by a profound, agonizing sadness. He did not yell. He did not command. He just took one more step, his hands open at his sides. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, do not go." The train was getting closer. He was not ordering her. He was asking. He was begging. The silent, scarred rancher was begging her to stay. She looked at his face, at the desperation there, and she knew, in that moment, that her leaving would not save him. It would be the final blow. It would be the thing that finally killed him. She dropped her valise. It hit the wooden platform with a soft, final thud. The ride back was silent, but the silence was electric. It was filled with the train whistle fading behind them and the words he had not said. They reached the cabin. Night had fallen. The moon was high and bright. He unhitched the horse, his movements slow, exhausted. She went inside and, from pure habit, lit the lamp and stirred the embers in the stove. He came in and stood by the door, just watching her. "Why?" she asked, her back to him. "Why did you stop me? I am what they say." He closed the door. He walked to the center of the small room. "Sit down, Cora." She sat on the edge of the bed. He paced, once, twice. He ran his hand through his hair. He looked like a man about to leap off a cliff. "You need to know," he said, his voice low. "You need to know the truth, not the rumors, the truth." He stopped pacing and faced her. "It was 5 years ago. Spring, just like this. The grass was high. Sarah, we heard them coming. A long way off. Raiders, maybe 10 of them. They were just men, hard men, looking for whiskey and guns." He stared at the wall, seeing it. "Sarah," she took Thomas, our boy. He was 4. She hid him under the bed. She begged me. "Eli, give them the horses. Give them the rifles. Just let them pass. Do not fight them." She was so scared. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "But I had built this place with my own hands. I would not be run off. I would not surrender. I told her to stay hidden. I told her I would handle it. Would." He looked at his hands. "I took my rifle. I went out. I thought I was strong enough. I shot one. From the window. And they got angry. They set the barn on fire." His voice was choking. "It was smoke. So much smoke. Sarah, she started screaming. Thomas was crying. I was trying to reload, and they came in, through the door I had left. I had left it unbarred." He squeezed his eyes shut. I fought until they hit me." He touched the scar on his face. "With a rifle butt. When I woke up, the cabin was on fire, and they were... He could not say it. He did entry continues. Not have to. "She begged me to surrender," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She begged me. And I fought. My pride. I fought. And I lost them. I lost them both. because I was too proud to just let it go. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw. When I came back here, after I buried them, I made a promise. I would never love anything again. I would never have another family. I would never have another child that could be taken. He took a step toward her. I believed I did not deserve it. I deserved to be alone. I deserved to be broken. That was my penance. Tears were streaming down Cora's face, silent, hot. When I saw your letter, the one the girls wrote, Mrs. Hobbs told me the truth about it. She said it was a cruel joke. She said, that girl is plain, and she is barren. And all I could think was, good. He was standing in front of her now, his body trembling. I did not want a wife. Cora, I did not want children. I wanted someone to sit by the fire with. I wanted to not be alone. I chose you because you were what they called you. I thought you would be safe. I thought I would be safe. That my heart would be safe. He reached out, his hand shaking, and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. But you did not just survive. You brought flowers. You fought for that calf. You stayed with me, in the storm. You are not safe at all, Cora. He was weeping now, silent tears that tracked down his scarred face. And I do not deserve you. Cora rose from the bed. She put her hands on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. She looked up at him, at the man behind the scar, at the pain he had carried alone. You are not broken, Eli, she whispered. You are just hurt. She leaned up and, gently, she kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss that said, I am here. I see you. He responded, his hands coming up to cup her face, his kiss deepening. It was not a taking. It was a finding. It was a drowning man finally taking a breath. It was gentle. It was real. It was filled with 5 years of his unshed tears and a lifetime of hers. He lifted her and carried her the single step to the bed. He laid her down, his eyes never leaving hers. They made love in the quiet of the cabin, a slow, careful joining that was more about healing than desire. It was two broken, lonely people, finally finding a way to be whole. After, they lay tangled in the quilts, the moonlight painting a silver square on the floor. The cabin was silent, save for their breathing. Cora was nestled against his chest, her head over his heart. She listened to it beat, strong and steady. Eli, she whispered into the darkness. I am here. I am infertile, she said, the word a simple fact now, not a curse. So, why? Why did you buy me? She needed to hear it one more time, now. He did not answer for a long moment. He just held her. Then, he took her hand and placed it on her own chest, over her heart. His hand covered hers. Not for children, he said, his voice rough. Not for survival. He pressed her hand flat. Because I knew, when I saw you on that platform, freezing and terrified. I knew you were the only one who could save me. Outside, in the far distance, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the high peaks. A prairie storm was brewing. The storm that had rumbled in the distance did not just arrive. It attacked. It tore through the valley like the raiders from Eli's past, an invading army of wind and light. The sky turned a bruised, sickly purple. Rain did not fall. It came in horizontal sheets, driven by a gale that sounded like a freight train passing an inch from the ear. Cora and Eli stood at the small window, watching the world dissolve. The new spring leaves were ripped from the aspen trees, and the creek, which had been a polite trickle, was now a roaring, muddy torrent. It is moving fast, Eli said, his voice a low rumble, his hand resting on the doorframe. He had not moved far from her since the night he had told her his story. A new, fragile peace existed between them. He slept on the cot, but the nights were no longer filled with his screams. Cora nodded, her gaze fixed on the swaying pines. "I have never seen a sky that color." A flash of light, so bright it bleached the world white, was followed instantly by a sound that was not thunder. It was a physical blow. A crack so loud it shook the cabin to its foundations. A tin cup rattled off the shelf and clanged to the floor. Simultaneously, a new, terrible light bloomed in the darkness, red and orange. "The barn," Eli breathed, his voice devoid of all emotion. He ripped the door open. The barn, the old, dry heart of their ranch, was a torch. A bolt of lightning had struck the roof, and the dry hay within had exploded. Flames, whipped by the wind, were already climbing 50 feet into the air. "The horses!" Cora screamed, pushing past him into the rain. "Cora, no!" Eli yelled, grabbing her arm. "It is too late." "We cannot let them burn," she shrieked, pulling free. The heat was a physical wall, pushing against them even from 30 yards away. The roar of the fire mixed with the howl of the wind. Eli, his face a mask of grim determination, grabbed a bucket. It was a useless, pathetic gesture against the inferno. He saw her running toward the side door of the barn, the one that led to the stalls. "Stay back," he bellowed, throwing the bucket down and running after her. Cora reached the door, the wood already hot to the touch. She fumbled with the latch, the metal searing her palm. She cried out, but yanked it open. A wall of thick, acrid smoke poured out, choking her. Inside, the 2 draft horses were screaming, a high, terrified sound of animal panic. They were rearing in their stalls, their eyes white. I cannot reach them," Cora choked, the smoke clawing at her lungs. Eli shoved her aside. "Get back," he commanded. He ripped the scarf from his neck, plunged it into the rain barrel beside the door, and tied the soaking cloth over his nose and mouth. He disappeared into the black smoke. Cora stood in the driving rain, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "Eli!" She heard splintering wood as he kicked in the stall door. A moment later, he burst back out, dragging one horse by the bridle. The animal was wild, fighting him, but Eli's grip was iron. "Get the gate," he roared. Cora scrambled to the corral, her hands slipping on the wet wood, and dragged the gate open. Eli shoved the horse through and slapped its rump, sending it galloping into the relative safety of the open pasture. "The other one," he said, turning back to the impossible wall of flame. "Eli, you cannot!" Cora screamed. The roof was groaning, a terrible structural sigh. He ignored her, plunging back into the smoke. This time, he was gone longer. 10 seconds, 20. Cora counted each one like a lifetime. The roar of the fire was deafening. "Eli!" He emerged, stumbling, the second horse rearing, its mane smoking. He fell to his knees, but he did not let go. Cora ran forward, grabbed the bridle, and pulled, adding her weight to his. Together, they wrestled the horse free, just as the main beam of the barn collapsed behind them. A volcano of sparks erupted into the night sky, and the entire structure folded in on itself. They slammed the corral gate shut and collapsed against it, gasping for air, soaked, scorched, and shaking. They watched the heart of their ranch burn down to the mud. The storm raged all night, as if trying to wash away the ashes. By dawn, it had passed, leaving a scoured, broken landscape. The barn was a smoking black square on the ground. As the first weak light hit the valley, a rider appeared. He was pushing his horse too hard through the mud. It was Mr. Slocum, their neighbor from the north, the one whose wife had turned her back on Cora. Slocum's face was a wreck of panic and exhaustion. He did not dismount. "McCrae," he panted. Have you seen my daughter?" Eli, who was sorting through the charred remains of his tools, straightened up. "What?" "Lydia, she is 8. She loved the storm. She went out, just to the porch, and the lightning. It must have spooked her. She ran. We have been searching all night." His voice cracked. She is not in her coat, just her nightdress." Cora's hand went to her mouth. Just her nightdress, in the freezing, rain-soaked woods. "We will look," Eli said, his voice flat. "Which way did she go?" "We do not know," Slocum cried, his gaze frantic. "She could be anywhere." He wheeled his horse and galloped off, shouting his daughter's name into the empty valley. "Eli," Cora said, her voice tight. "The woods, the creek. She would have gone downhill." "You stay here," Eli said. "The ground is not stable. The creek is flooded." "No," Cora said. It was not a refusal. It was a fact. "You take the ridge. I will take the creek bed. We will find her." He looked at her, at the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw the fire from the night before, still burning in her eyes. He nodded. "Once. Fire the rifle if you find her." For hours, Cora walked. She plunged through mud that tried to steal her boots. She scrambled over fallen, rain-slicked logs. The creek was a monster, brown and roaring, eating its banks. "Lydia," she called, her voice growing hoarse. "Lydia Slocum." She pushed her way through a thicket of thorns that tore at her dress and her skin. She was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, cold, wet, and exhausted, but she did not stop. She thought of the little girl, alone, in only a thin piece of cotton. She found her in a hollow, a small washout under the roots of an upturned sycamore tree. The child had wedged herself there, seeking shelter, and had fallen asleep or unconscious. She was a small, pale heap, her lips a frightening shade of blue. Her nightdress was soaked and caked with mud. "Lydia," Cora whispered, sliding down the muddy bank. She touched the girl's cheek. It was as cold as ice, but she was breathing, shallow, faint, but breathing. "Oh, thank God." Cora wept. She ripped off her own wool coat, the one that had seen her through the winter, and wrapped the small, limp body in it. She lifted the child, a dead weight, into her arms. Lydia was not heavy, but the walk back was the hardest thing Cora had ever done. The child was a fragile, precious burden. Cora's arms, strong from hauling wood, now ached with a different kind of strain. She refused to stumble. She refused to fall. She focused on the cabin. "You will not die," Cora whispered into the girl's damp hair. "I will not let you die." She kicked the cabin door open. Eli was there. He had returned, his face grim. He saw the bundle in her arms and his eyes went wide. "She is alive," Cora panted, her voice cracking. "She is so cold." They worked as a team. He took the child from her, his large, rough hands impossibly gentle, and laid her on their bed. Cora ripped the wet nightdress from the girl's body and began rubbing her limbs, hard, forcing the blood to move. Eli filled their small metal tub with warm water from the stove, testing it with his elbow. They submerged her, and the child finally gasped. A small, painful sound. Her eyes flickered open. They were blue and terrified. "It is all right," Cora soothed, her voice a low hum. "You are safe. You are warm." When Slocum returned, his face ashen with despair, he found his daughter sitting by the fire, wrapped in Eli's thickest wool blanket, sipping warm, sweetened broth from Cora's tin cup. "Mrs." Slocum arrived an hour later, running into the cabin, her face undone with tears. She snatched Lydia into her arms, sobbing, checking every finger and toe. We, God bless you," Slocum stammered, his eyes on Eli. "Mrs." Slocum finally looked up, her gaze landing on Cora. Her expression was a mixture of profound gratitude and a deep, unsettling confusion. You found her in the woods." "She was by the creek," Cora said, her voice quiet. She was shivering, wearing only her thin dress. "Mrs." Slocum clutched her daughter tighter. "Thank you," she whispered, but her eyes were wary. The gratitude of the Slocums did not change the heart of the town. It only twisted the narrative. The story spread. The McCrae ranch had been struck by lightning. The barn burned to the ground. But the horses were untouched. The cabin was untouched. Eli McCrae and his barren wife were untouched. And then, that same woman had walked into the flooded woods, in the worst storm in memory, and walked out with the Slocum girl, who did not even catch a cold. It was not a miracle. It was unnatural. Mr. Fuller, his jaw still bruised, spread the word. "She is hexed," he told the men in the store. "That woman, she draws trouble, but it does not touch her. She is like a lightning rod. She brought that storm, and now she is, what, stealing children from the woods?" The word hexed stuck. It was easier to believe than the alternative, that a woman they had dismissed as useless was, in fact, stronger than any of them. A week later, a traveling preacher, Reverend Gideon, arrived in Cauldron Creek. He was a tall, thin man with eyes like burning coals and a voice that could cut timber. He preached in the street, his pulpit a horse trough. Cora and Eli were in town. Eli negotiating with a sawmill for lumber. Cora was at the store, enduring the cold stares. When the Reverend's voice boomed across the street, "The Lord tells us to be fruitful and multiply," he roared, his fingers stabbing at the sky. "A man and a woman, joined in holy matrimony, are blessed by the fruit of the womb. It is the sacred covenant." Cora tried to ignore him, her face burning. "But what of the unnatural wife?" he shouted. And Cora knew. He was talking about her. What of the barren field that yields no crop? What of the woman who is a wife in name, but not in purpose? It is a mockery. It is an affront to God's law. Such an arrangement invites darkness. It invites the storm. It invites the curse. Cora dropped the sack of nails she was holding. They scattered across the wooden floor with a sound like gunfire. She turned and fled. She ran all the way to the wagon, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She climbed into the back, hiding herself. And finally, let the tears come. Eli found her there minutes later. He did not ask what was wrong. He had heard the sermon. His face was a thundercloud. He climbed onto the seat, snapped the reins, and drove them out of town, the preacher's words following them like stones. That night, Cora coughed. It was not a new cough. She had been coughing for days, a dry, hacking sound she blamed on the smoke from the fire, the damp from the storm. But this was different. It was a deep, wet cough that tore from her chest. She put her hand to her mouth. When she pulled it away, she stared at it in the lamplight. Her palm was smeared with bright, terrifying red. She tried to hide it, but Eli saw. He had been watching her like a hawk since the sermon. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand closing over her wrist. He turned her palm to the light. "Blood," he said. The word was not a question. It was a verdict. It is just the smoke, Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling. "From the fire. My lungs are just—" "No," he said, his voice flat, "dead." He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a new, sharper terror than any she had seen there. "It is the consumption. Tuberculosis, the white plague. It had taken his uncle. It had taken 2 families in the valley. It was a death sentence." "Eli, I feel fine." She lied. She felt weak, and a fever was beginning to prickle at her skin. He let go of her hand and stepped back. He looked around the cabin, his gaze frantic, trapped. He was seeing it. He was seeing her, wasting away, coughing her life into a rag, becoming another ghost to haunt the valley. "No," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I will not." "Eli, what?" "You will go," he said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the wall. "Tomorrow, I am taking you to the train. You will go east to a hospital in Denver or back to St. Louis." Cora's heart stopped. "What? No, Eli, I am not leaving you." "You are," he snapped, his voice suddenly hard. I will not watch this. I will not do this again." He was not sending her away for her health. He was sending her away so he would not have to watch another woman he loved die. "You are casting me out?" she whispered, the cruelty of it a physical blow. "I am saving you," he yelled, his hands clenched. "And I am... He could not finish. He grabbed his coat. "Eli, where are you going?" "To Slocum's," he bit out. To borrow money. For your ticket." He slammed the door, leaving her alone in the cabin, the speck of blood on her hand feeling as heavy as a death shroud. She did not wait up. She crawled into the bed, her body aching, her heart shattered. He had finally let her in. And now, at the first sign of weakness, the first sign she might be a burden, he was throwing her away. Just like the girls at the orphanage, just like the gossips in town. She was, after all, just damaged goods. She fell into a fevered, restless sleep. She woke to a searing pain in her chest. She tried to breathe, but it was like inhaling broken glass. She gasped, and the cough came, a violent, agonizing spasm that arched her off the bed. "Eli!" she choked. He was there. Instantly, the lamp lit. He had been sitting in the chair, watching her. "Cora," he said, his voice tight with panic. She collapsed back onto the pillows, her hand clutching her side. I cannot breathe." Her body was on fire. The room was spinning. He touched her forehead, his rough hand surprisingly gentle. "You are burning," he said. He did not see tuberculosis. He saw a fever, fast and violent. He saw the suddenness of it. "This is not consumption," he murmured, his voice sharp with a new, focused intensity. This is pneumonia. From the storm. From the creek." Sentry continues. Ora did not care about the name. She only knew the pain. She slipped into a dark, suffocating fog. For 3 days, she was lost. She was aware, in brief flashes, of him. He was a constant, solid presence. He held her head, forcing cool water between her cracked lips. He bathed her face and her neck with a damp cloth. He sat in the chair, his rifle across his knees, watching her, as if he could fight the fever like he had fought the raiders. He did not sleep. He fed the fire. He boiled broth which she could not drink, and he watched. In her fever, she was not in the cabin. She was on the train. She was in the orphanage. She was in the cold. "Please," she whimpered, her voice a child's. Do not send me away. I will be good. I will work." "I am here, Cora," his voice rumbled, a rock in her storm. "I am not sending you anywhere. You stay. You hear me? You stay." On the second night, the fever was at its worst. She was thrashing, her dreams filled with the preacher's angry face and the sight of her own blood. She felt a hand on her forehead, a cool cloth. She opened her eyes, but she did not see the cabin. She saw only him, the man who had saved her, the man who was hers. "It is all right," she mumbled, her voice thick, her words slurring. She reached up, her hand fumbling, and found his scarred cheek. "It is all right, my husband." Eli froze. His heart stopped, then kicked. Hard. "My husband." She had never called him that. They were Eli and Cora. They were two broken people. But in her delirium, she had spoken the truth that had grown between them. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing the back of it. He leaned his head down, pressing his scarred cheek into her palm. "I am here, Cora," he whispered. "I am here." On the 4th morning, she woke. The fever was gone. It had broken in the night, leaving her weak, scoured, and drenched in sweat. But she was her lungs still ached, a deep, bruised pain, but the glass was gone. She could breathe. She opened her eyes. Eli was asleep in the chair, his head slumped forward, his rifle on the floor by his feet. He looked 10 years older, his face gray with exhaustion. She moved her hand. The quilt rustled. His head snapped up, his eyes instantly awake, sharp and filled with fear. He saw her. He saw her eyes, clear and sane, looking back at him. "Cora," he whispered. She tried to speak. Only a croak came out. She smiled, a small, weak twitch of her lips. He did not smile back. His face crumpled. The relief was so profound, so agonizing, it was like a wound. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He did not speak. He just reached out and gathered her into his arms. He held her like he had never held anyone, not with passion, not with desire. He held her with a desperate, terrified, and triumphant grip. He held her like he had just pulled her from a fire, from a river, from a grave. He buried his face in her hair, and his entire body shook. Her recovery was slow. The pneumonia had taken a toll, leaving her weaker than she had ever been. Her body, which she had pushed to its limits, now reminded her of those limits. She would try to sweep the floor and be forced to sit, her breath coming too fast. Eli was relentless in his care. He cooked for her strong broths and tender rabbit meat. He forbade her from going outside. He treated her as if she were made of thin glass. And in the new silence, a new intimacy bloomed. He would read to her in the evenings, his voice a low rumble, stumbling over the words in the old Shakespeare book, but refusing to stop. One afternoon, a wagon rattled into their valley. It was not Slocum. It was a stranger, a face Cora had never seen. The wagon was old, pulled by a half-dead mule. Eli went out, his rifle in his hand. "Please," a man's voice called. "Please, mister, I need help." Eli motioned, and the man, thin as a rail, helped a woman down from the wagon. She was young, barely a woman at all, and enormously pregnant. Her face was pale, her dress was rags, and she was starving. Our wagon broke an axle, 2 miles back," the man stammered. "My wife, Sarah, her time is coming." Eli looked at Cora, who was standing in the doorway. Cora nodded. "Bring her in," Eli said. They laid her on the big bed, the one that had become Cora's. The woman, whose name was Sarah, the same name as the woman buried behind the cabin, was terrified. "It is too soon," she wept. I do not—" "Shh," Cora said, taking her hand. Cora's voice was weak, but her grip was firm. "I am here. I will help you." The labor was fast and brutal. The girl was young, her body too weak from hunger. Eli provided hot water and rags, his face grim, his movements steady. But Cora took over. She found a strength she did not know she possessed. She coached the girl, her voice low and steady. She held her hand. She wiped her brow. She was a general, a mother, a sister. "Now," Cora commanded, her own weakness forgotten. "Push, Sarah! You can do this!" With a final, desperate cry, the baby came into the world. It was a girl, small and red, but blessedly, she was crying, a thin, healthy wail. Cora cleaned the baby, her hands, which had birthed a calf, now infinitely tender. She cut the cord, her hands steady. She wrapped the infant in a clean piece of flannel. The new mother, Sarah, had fainted from the effort. Her husband was weeping by her side. Cora, her work done, sat in the chair by the fire, holding the newborn. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the small, grasping fingers. The baby calmed, her cries softening to a small coo, her eyes blinking in the firelight. Cora's heart, the one she had guarded for so long, the one she had filled with letters to children who would never be, simply broke open. A sob, a great, tearing sound, escaped her. She wept. She wept for her own empty womb. She wept for the doctor's words. She wept for the cruelty of the girls at the orphanage and the women in the town, and she wept with a love so fierce, so profound. It was a physical pain. She did not know Eli was watching. He stood in the shadows, his heart aching. He watched this woman, his wife, the one he had bought for $1, the one who had saved his horses and his neighbor's child and his own life. He watched her cradle another woman's baby, her face a mask of pure, agonizing love. He walked over to her. He knelt in front of the chair. She looked up at him, her face wet with tears. She is perfect, Eli," she whispered, her voice thick. He did not look at the baby. He looked at Cora. He reached out and, with his thumb, he wiped a tear from her cheek. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "She is." He looked at Cora, holding the child, her body radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "You are a mother, Cora," he said softly. "You are." The young mother, Sarah, did not recover. The frontier, which had already taken her health and her savings, came back for the rest. She had given everything she had to the small, wailing baby, and there was nothing left for herself. She slipped away 2 days after the birth, a quiet fading in the afternoon light. Her husband, a thin, nervous man named Tom, was broken by it. He was a drifter, built for running, not for staying, and this final, brutal stop had shattered him. Cora washed the young woman's body, her hands gentle, her heart a cold, heavy stone. She had held the baby, she had saved the baby, but she could not save the mother. Tom sat on the stool by the stove, his head in his hands. For a full day, he did not eat. He did not look at his child. The next morning, he was gone. He had taken his mule, his empty pack, and he had vanished, leaving his newborn daughter behind, a tiny, orphaned piece of driftwood in their cabin. Cora, who had been feeding the baby with a rag dipped in watered-down cow's milk, found his note. "I cannot take her to the church. I cannot." "He left her," Cora whispered, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Eli, he just left her." Eli came in from the half-rebuilt barn, his hands stained with pine tar. He read the note. His face was grim. "He is a coward. We will take her to Cauldron Creek. Mrs. Hobbs will know what to do. The circuit judge is in town. They will find an orphanage." Cora looked down at the infant sleeping in a crate they had lined with blankets. The baby's face was small and red. Her tiny hand curled into a fist. Cora had not slept, her body still weak from the pneumonia, but she had not put the child down for more than an hour. She had held her, felt her small heart beat against her own. "No," Cora said. Eli stopped. "Cora." "What?" "No," she said again, her voice stronger. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce, shining with a terrifying, absolute certainty. "We are not taking her to an orphanage. I know what that is. It is a cold place. It is gray. It is not a life." She is not ours," Eli said, his voice gentle but firm. "He left her. Her mother is dead. Who else does she have?" Cora took a breath, the words catching in her throat. "Eli, let us keep her." The suggestion hung in the air, a physical thing. Eli's reaction was immediate and violent. He recoiled, as if she had struck him. He took a physical step back, his hand coming up as if to ward off a blow. "No," the word was choked, raw. "Eli, please." "No," he said, his voice louder, sharper. He turned away from her, his back rigid. He stared at the wall. I cannot, Cora, I cannot. Why? She pleaded. She is just a baby. She is a baby, he said, his voice breaking. He gestured to entry continues, Yurd, his hand shaking, toward the window, toward the two small mounds behind the pines. He was a baby. Thomas was. He was 4. He was small, and I cannot lose. I cannot love. I will not bury another child. Cora, I will not. The old terror was back. The ghosts he had begun to lay to rest had risen, summoned by the cry of a newborn, to love something so fragile, so small, so mortal. It was, to him, a new kind of hell. It was inviting the raiders back into his home. She is not Thomas, Cora said, her voice quiet but insistent. She is not here to be lost. She is here to be found. He left her. Eli, if we turn her out, we are no better than him. It is not the same, he argued. But his voice was weak. He was haunted, his eyes filled with the smoke and the fire from 5 years ago. I cannot. Word traveled. A drifter's wife dead at the McCrae Ranch, a baby left behind. And now, the barren dollar bride, the hexed woman, was trying to keep it. The news hit Cauldron Creek like a lit match on dry tinder. It is an abomination. Reverend Gideon declared from the steps of the saloon, a woman cursed by God, barren as the salt flats, trying to steal a Christian child. She is unfit, Mrs. Davies announced at the general store. She is married to a half-madman. What kind of life is that for an infant? She will bring her curse down on that poor, motherless child. Mr. Fuller saw an opportunity. It is against the law, is what it is. He said to anyone who would listen, a child cannot just be claimed. Like a stray calf, there are procedures. There is blood. And as if summoned by the word, blood arrived. He was a man named Silas Croft. He rode into town on a mean-looking horse, his face a map of dirt and suspicion. He claimed to be the cousin of the dead mother, Sarah. I am her blood, he announced to Judge Miller, the circuit judge who was holding court in the back room of the hotel. That child, she is my kin. I am here to claim her. Silas Croft was a cruel-looking man, his eyes small and close-set. He smelled of cheap whiskey and unwashed wool. He looked at the baby, who was being temporarily held by Mrs. Slocum, the only woman in town who would not meet Cora's eye, her debt for her own daughter's life warring with her fear of the town. Croft did not look at the baby with love. He looked at her with calculation. A girl, he sneered. She will be old enough to help on the farm in a few years. She is my blood. The law says she is mine. Judge Miller, a weary man with a face like old leather, set a hearing. Town Hall, he announced. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. We will sort this. The town hall was the largest room in Cauldron Creek, the main room of the saloon, scrubbed of its morning sawdust. It was packed. Every person who had ever whispered about Cora was there. Fuller, Mrs. Davies, Reverend Gideon. They sat on the benches, their faces hard and righteous. In the front, Silas Croft sat, his arms crossed, a smirk on his face. Eli and Cora sat on the other side. Eli was stiff, his face carved from stone. He wore his good shirt, but his eyes were the eyes of a man cornered, his rifle left at the door. Cora sat beside him, her hands twisted in her lap. She was small, pale, and looked terrified. Judge Miller banged a gavel. We are here to determine the custody of the infant. Child of Tom and Sarah. The child's last name is unknown, he sighed. Mr. Croft, you claim blood. I do, Your Honor, Croft said, standing. Sarah, her ma and my PA were brother and sister. That makes us cousins. I am the only family she has got. The law's clear. Bloodkin comes first. And you have a home for this child? The judge asked. A farm, up north. She will be fine. I will raise her, Croft said. Reverend Gideon stood. Judge, if I may, it is not just a question of blood. It is a question of decency, of God's law. This woman, he pointed a long, bony finger at Cora, is not fit. She is a barren woman. She is unnatural. The town is unsettled by her. She and her husband live under a cloud of tragedy. The lightning, the child will not be safe there. He is right, Fuller called out. She is not right, and he pointed at Eli, is a violent man. He struck me, in my own store. The room murmured, a low, angry hum. They were a mob, united in their judgment. Judge Miller looked at Eli. Mr. McCrae, is this true? Did you strike this man? Eli stood slowly. His height seemed to suck the air from the room. He insulted my wife, Eli said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. So, I hit him. I would do it again. More murmurs. Croft smiled, smelling victory. And Mrs. McCrae, the judge said, his gaze softening slightly as he turned to her. You wish to keep this child, a child, not your own, with no experience, no children. Cora stood. Her knees were shaking so hard she thought she would fall. She gripped the back of the bench. She looked at the faces, the cold eyes of Mrs. Davies, the righteous fury of the preacher, the greedy squint of Silas Croft, the weak pity in Mrs. Slocum's gaze. She looked at Eli. He was watching her, his face a mask of terror, not of the crowd, but for her. He was terrified of what they were doing to her. His fear gave her strength. She turned back to the judge. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was low, and it was clear, and it cut through the murmuring like a knife. No, she said, I have no experience with children. The room stilled. I have no experience, because I was told I never would. She looked at the crowd, her gaze moving from face to face. My name is Cora McCrae. I was raised in the St. Louis orphanage. I was told I was plain. I was told I was unlovable. When I was 17, a doctor told me I was barren, that my insides were flawed, that I was broken. Reverend Gideon nodded, as if she were proving his point. The girls, at the orphanage, they sent my name to a matchmaker, as a cruel joke, to see who would answer for a bride who was useless. Her voice cracked, just for a moment, but she did not stop. Mr. McCrae, he answered. He paid $1. You all know that. You have whispered it. You have laughed about it. She looked at Fuller. You have called me a dried-up bride. You have called me a waste of space. You, she looked at Mrs. Davies, have called me a barren mule. The women flushed, looking away. For my entire life, Cora continued, her voice gaining a strange, rhythmic power. I have been told I am nothing because my womb is empty. I believed you. I carried that shame. I came here, to this valley, expecting to be a servant, expecting to sleep in the barn. She turned to Eli. But he did not treat me like a servant. He treated me like a person. And this valley, it has been hard. We nearly starved. We froze. She looked at Mrs. Slocum. when your daughter, when Lydia was lost, I did not think about being hexed. I thought about a child alone in the cold. She looked back at the judge. And when that baby, when she was born, and her mother died, and her father, he ran. I held her. I have been feeding her. I have been keeping her warm. I have not slept because she needed me. She was weeping now, silent tears that she did not bother to wipe away. You stand here, and you talk about blood. She spat the word, her gaze landing on Silas Croft. Blood left her. Blood ran away. Blood sees her as labor. She pointed a shaking finger at him. You do not want a child. You want a slave. That is a lie, Croft shouted. No, Cora's voice rose, filling the room. It is the truth. You talk about God, about what is natural. You tell me I am unnatural. She paused, taking a ragged, shuddering breath. She stood up straight. Motherhood, she said, her voice dropping, but carrying to every corner of the room, is not just blood. Blood can be cruel. Blood can be weak. Motherhood is work. She looked at Eli, her eyes locking with his. Motherhood is who stays. It is who stays when the world is cruel. It is who fights for a calf in a storm. It is who nurses a man when he is dying. It is who walks into a flooded wood for a child that is not hers. It is who refuses to let you die. She turned, her face a mask of tears and raw, fiery conviction. That baby, she is not my blood, Cora said, her voice breaking. But she is my heart, and I am her mother. The silence was absolute. It was not just quiet. It was a vacuum. No one coughed. No one moved. The entire town was breathless. Silas Croft sputtered. This is madness. The law is the law. Eli McCrae stood up. He did not a single person in the room breathed. He was not the half-mad widower. He was a pillar of quiet, terrifying strength. He put his large, scarred hand on Cora's trembling shoulder. He looked, not at the judge, but at the crowd, at Fuller, at Gideon, at Silas Croft. That child, Eli said, his voice a low rumble, shaking the floorboards, is our family. He paused, letting the words settle. And if this town, he continued, or if this law, if it tries to, to, to take her from us. I will sell. I will sell the ranch. I will sell every board, every nail, every acre. He looked at Croft. And I will use the money to fight you. I will follow you to whatever court you name. I will spend every dollar I have to see you ruined. He looked at Cora, his gaze softening. We are not leaving her. Judge Miller stared at them. He was no longer a weary bureaucrat. He was moved. He cleared his throat. He looked at Silas Croft, his expression hardening. I was widowed, the judge said, his voice quiet. My wife, she died. She died, birthing our son. I raised him alone. I know. A little, something about what makes family. He looked at Cora, and his eyes were kind. It is not always blood. He turned his hard gaze back to Croft. And I know a man who sees a child as labor when I see one your claim, Mr. Croft. It is a thin end, and your intentions they are questionable. He looked at the baby, who was now awake, whimpering in Mrs. Slocum's arms. That child, she has no one. The father, he has abandoned her. She needs a home now. She needs. He looked at Cora. Mother. He banged the gavel. The sound was a shot. Custody is granted to Mr. and Mrs. McCrae. For a moment, Cora did not move. She just stared. Then her knees buckled. Eli caught her, pulling her against his chest. She wept, deep, shuddering sobs of a lifetime of pain and a moment of impossible victory. Mrs. Slocum, her own face wet with tears, walked over. She did not speak. She just handed the small, blanket-wrapped bundle to Cora. Cora took the child. She held her, burying her face in the blanket. inhaling the sweet, milky smell of her child. Eli put his arm around them both. He did not look at the stunned, silent crowd. He guided his family out of the saloon, into the bright, clean sunlight. They brought her home. That night, the cabin was transformed. The old, haunted space was gone. It was filled with a new sound, the soft, snuffling breaths of a sleeping infant. Cora sat in the rocking chair Eli had dragged from the ruins of the barn, her body weak but her heart full to bursting. She needs a name, Eli said. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, just watching them. Cora looked down at the tiny face. She thought of the long winter, the blizzard, the fire, the sickness, the fight. She thought of this small, impossible life, a single point of light in a dark, cruel world. Hope, Cora whispered, the word a prayer. Her name, it is Hope. Eli smiled. It was the first real smile she had ever seen on his face. It transformed him. The scar, it just disappeared. Hope, he repeated. Hope, McCrae. I like that. A week later, Eli came back from town. He had a small, flat package wrapped in burlap. He did not go to the new barn he was building. He walked to the small graveyard behind the pines. Cora watched him from the window, holding Hope. He did not go to Sarah's grave. He did not go to Thomas's. He went to a spot, a little ways off, near the path that led to the cabin. He unwrapped the package. It was a new headstone, a simple, square piece of granite. He had dug the hole the day before. He set the stone. Cora walked out to him, her heart in her throat. She looked at the stone. It did not have a name. It did not have a date. It had 6 words, carved deep and clear. Here rests the past. We choose life now. The valley was no longer a tomb. 4 years had passed, 4 seasons turning one upon the other, and the land, like the people on it, had healed. The scar of the burned barn was gone, replaced by a new one, built with lumber from the sawmill. Not just desperation. It stood taller, its roof pitched at a sharper angle, its foundation resting on stone. The cabin, too, had grown. Eli had added a new room, a small bedroom for their daughter, its single window facing the sunrise. Spring came not as a battle, but as a promise kept. The pastures were thick and green, the cattle fat and calm. Hope McCrae was 3 years old. She was a whirlwind, a small, bright creature who had known nothing of orphanages or cruelty. She was, in every way, a child of the valley. She had her birth mother's dark, curling hair, but her eyes, her observers said, were her own, bright and curious. She was utterly without fear. She would toddle through the new grass, her small dress hitched up, chasing the chickens with a delighted shriek. The birds, who had once been safe, now lived in a state of constant, flapping alarm. Eli, the scarred, silent man who had once been terrified of love, was her captive. Cora would watch from the new porch, her heart so full it was a physical ache. Hope would see him mending a fence line, his broad back bent to the task, and she would run, her small legs pumping. "Papa!" she would yell, her voice carrying on the wind. He would freeze every time, as if the word were a bullet. Then he would turn, slowly. He would drop his tools. Hope would launch herself at his leg, wrapping her arms around his knee, hugging him with all her tiny might. Eli would stand there, his large, rough hand resting on her head, his eyes closed. He would not speak. He would just breathe. He would soak in the feeling of her, this impossible, warm, living child who was his. Then he would grunt, a low, soft sound, and lift her, placing her on his shoulders. She would laugh, her hands tangled in his hair. the queen of the High Valley. He had not just learned to love again, he had learned to live again. Cora still wrote. The old, leather-bound journal was nearly full, but the entries were different. The aching, desperate letters to the children she would never have were gone. Now, she wrote to the child she did. "My dearest Hope," she wrote, the lamplight falling on the page. "Today you put a frog in Mr. Slocum's boot when he came to call. He did not find it until he was halfway home. Eli pretended to be angry, but I saw him laughing when he was in the barn. He is a terrible liar. You are, my darling, a terror, and you are my light." She documented everything. The day Hope first walked, the day she said "Mama," the day she pointed to the grave of Thomas, the small boy buried behind the pines, and asked who he was. Cora had sat in the grass, holding her, and told her, "He was your father's first son. He is your brother. In a way, we remember him. We remember them both." Hope had listened, her small face serious, and then she had patted the small wooden cross, as if in comfort. Cora's world had expanded beyond the ranch. Her act in the town hall had broken the dam of fear and superstition. It had not made her popular, but it had made her respected. Mrs. Slocum had been the first. She had come to the ranch a month after the hearing, her face pale, holding a basket of fresh eggs. She had stood on the porch, twisting her apron. My Lydia," she had stammered. She still has nightmares about the woods, but she asks about you. She says you were not scared." "I was," Cora had said, her voice gentle. "But she was colder than I was scared." Will you teach her, Mrs. Slocum had blurted. "Her letters, she does not learn from me. She respects you." And so the school had begun. It started with Lydia Slocum at the small table in the cabin. Then 2 more children came from a ranch on the far side of the valley. By the time Hope was 3, Cora was running a small school out of her cabin 3 days a week. She was teacher. She was no longer the dollar bride. She was Mrs. McCrae. The children sat on benches Eli had built, their slates in their laps. Cora, her own education from the orphanage, limited but prized, taught them their letters, their numbers, and, most importantly, she read to them. She read from the Shakespeare Eli had kept. She read from her own Bible. She taught them that the world was wider than their valley, and that words had a power that could build or destroy. The town had changed. Mr. Fuller, facing a boycott from the Slocums and the other valley families, had grudgingly offered Eli credit. He was no longer welcoming, but he was no longer openly hostile. The rumors had died, replaced by a quiet, grudging respect. One day, in the fall, a visitor came. Cora was outside, hanging laundry, a task she still found peace in. Hope was asleep inside, a lone rider, on a tired-looking gray horse, stopped at their fence line. Cora's heart tightened. It was the preacher, Reverend Gideon. He looked older, his fiery gaze dimmed, his shoulders slumped. He did not look like a prophet. He looked like a man who was lost. He dismounted, holding his hat in his hands. "Mrs. McCrae," he said, his voice no longer a boom, but a dry rasp. "Reverend," Cora said. She did not invite him in. She stood by her laundry basket, waiting. I I was passing through, he said, staring at the ground. I, I, I heard you kept the child. Her name is Hope, Cora said. She is my daughter. He winced. Yes, I. He looked up, and Cora was startled to see his eyes were filled with a profound, hollow grief. I lost my daughter, my own, this past winter, in Denver, the fever, she was 6. Sentry continues. Aura's hands, which had been gripping the basket, relaxed. I am sorry, she said, and she meant it. She was my blood, he whispered, the word a curse. My own and God did not spare it her. I preached against you. I said you were unnatural. I said you were mockery. He was weeping now, hard, dry sobs that shook his thin frame. I was a fool, loud, blind, fool. I thought God was in the blood. I did not see, and he was in the staying. He had used her word. Cora looked at this broken man, this hollow echo of the thunderous preacher who had tried to destroy her. She felt no triumph. She only felt a deep, shared sadness. I came to ask your forgiveness, Mrs. McCrae, he choked out. I was wrong. Cora walked over to him. She did not touch him. She just stood in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. I forgive you, Reverend, she said, her voice clear and strong. I forgive your cruelty because you did not, no, you did not understand. He nodded, relief flooding his face. But, she said, her voice hardening just enough to make him stiffen, do not mistake my softness my softness, for weakness. God, 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 God is in the mercy. But, I, 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 I have learned to fight for my family. Do you understand me? He looked at her, at the woman who had faced down a mob, at the mother who had claimed her child. He was not looking at a barren mule. He was looking at a force of nature. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. I do." He got on his horse and rode away, a smaller man than the one who had arrived. Life settled into a rhythm, the rhythm of the school, of the ranch, of a child's laughter. The winters were still hard, but the cabin was warm, the larder full. Eli's nightmares had faded. He still had them, but they were shadows, no longer monsters. He would wake sometimes, his hand reaching out, and Cora would take it. "I am here," she would say. "We are here," and he would go back to sleep. Then the spring came when hope was for. It came with a vengeance. The snowmelt in the high peaks was too fast, too sudden. A week of unseasonable, heavy rain followed. The valley, which was their sanctuary, became a trap. The creek, the same one where Cora had bathed, the one where she had found Lydia, transformed into a raging, muddy river. It overflowed its banks, swallowing the lower pasture, the water rising with terrifying speed. It is not stopping," Eli said, standing at the door. The water was already at the edge of the new barn. The graves, on their small rise, were safe. The new headstone, "Here rests the past," was an island in the rising tide. The horses," Cora said, her voice tight, hope clutching her skirts. I put them on the high ground," Eli said. But the water, it is finding new channel. It is cutting toward the cabin. He was right. A torrent of brown, churning water was breaking away from the main flood, aimed directly at the foundation of their home. I have to divert it, Eli said. He grabbed his shovel, an axe, and a coil of heavy rope. "Eli, no!" Cora cried. It is too fast. It is not just water. It is carrying. Logs! She had seen them, small trees, ripped from the earth, tumbling in the current. This is our home, he said. He looked at her, at Hope. I will not lose it. He was not the man who had fought out of pride. He was a man fighting to protect. Mama, Hope whispered, her small face pale with fear. It is salty, all that you're right, all right. My. Love, Cora said, her voice shaking. You, stay here, away from the window. Eli plunged into the storm. Cora watched, her heart in her throat. He waded into the churning water, which was already waist deep. He was trying to reach a jam of old logs and debris that had formed. If he could break it, or reinforce it in a different direction, the water might turn. He worked like a madman, the rain lashing him. He sunk the axe into the wood, using the shovel as a lever. The water was a living thing, fighting him, trying to pull him under. He slipped, went under, and Cora screamed. He surfaced, sputtering, and kept working. He was a small, strong figure, battling an ocean. He was not winning, but he was not stopping. Then, a large log, the trunk of a full-grown pine, broke free upriver. It rolled, heavy and slow, in the current, and then it picked up speed. Eli! Cora screamed, though he could not possibly hear her over the roar. The log struck the jam, and Eli, at the same time, it hit him in the chest, pinning him against the debris. He cried out, a sound of agony that cut through the storm. He went down, and this time, he did not come back up. No, Cora whispered. No. She ran to Hope. Get on the bed. Do not get down. Do not move. Do you understand me? Hope, stay on the bed. The child, her eyes wide with terror, nodded. Cora grabbed the end of the rope Eli had left. She tied it fast to the door latch, the one he had used in the blizzard. She plunged out into the rain, into the flood. The water was a freezing, violent shock. It tore at her skirts, trying to knock her off her feet. She held the rope, paying it out, fighting her way to the log jam. Eli! She saw him. He was pinned, his head barely above the water, which was rising. His arm was bent at a terrible, unnatural angle. His face was pale, his eyes closed. Eli! She screamed, clawing her way over the slick, treacherous logs. She reached him. He was unconscious. A deep gash was open on his forehead, blood mixing with the muddy water. You, not get to die, she sobbed. pulling at the log that trapped him. It would not budge. She used his axe, still wedged in the jam. She put all her strength, all her fear, all her love, into one desperate blow. The wood splintered. She hacked again and again. The log shifted, just an inch. She dropped the axe and put her shoulder under the log, using her legs, bracing herself. She screamed, a raw, animal sound of effort. The log moved. Eli's body came free, floating limp in the water. Cora grabbed him, his dead weight nearly pulling her under. She wrapped the rope around his chest, under his arms, and tied a knot she had learned from him. She began to pull, walking backward, hand over hand, toward the cabin. She dragged him from the water. She dragged him across the mud. She dragged him onto the porch, collapsing, her lungs on fire. The new channel of water, its path blocked by the very log that had struck him, had turned. It was now flowing away from the cabin, back toward the main creek. He had saved them. She pulled him inside, barricading the door against the water. Hope was still on the bed, silent, her small face streaky with tears. He is hurt, Cora panted. She tended to him. His arm was broken, a clean snap of the bone. His head was gashed, and he had 3 broken ribs, but he was breathing. She worked all night, a grim echo of the pneumonia blizzard. She set his arm, her hands surprisingly steady. She cleaned and stitched the wound on his head. She bound his ribs with torn sheets. She sat by the cot, which was now his bed again, and she held his hand. She did not sleep. She watched him breathe. He woke just before dawn. The storm had passed. The cabin was silent, save for the sound of dripping water and Hope's soft breathing. His eyes, clear and blue, found hers. "Cora!" he rasped. I am here," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. The cabin," he said, trying to sit up. Is safe," she said, pushing him gently back down. You, saved it, saved us. He looked at her face, streaked with mud and blood, her hair plastered to her head, her dress torn. He saw the woman who had pulled him from the flood. You, saved me, he whispered. That night, he was in too much pain to sleep. Cora built up the fire, the warm, orange light pushing back the damp shadows. The flood was receding. Hope was asleep in her room. Cora sat on the floor, her back against his cot, so she could hear him if he needed her. "Cora," he said softly from the shadows. She turned. I am here. I think I remember you calling me, your husband, when you had the fever. She smiled in the darkness. I think I did. Is that true? Is that not? Yes, he said. They were quiet for a long time, the fire hissing and crackling. Cora laid her head back against his mattress. Eli, she whispered. That first night I was so ashamed of that dollar. She turned, her eyes finding his in the dim light. You did not buy me, did you? He reached out his good hand, his fingers finding her hair. No, Cora. You saved me, she said, the tears finally coming. From the orphanage, from being nothing. You saved me. He pulled her gently, and she stood, moving to sit on the edge of the cot, careful of his ribs. He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. You gave me back the live, he replied, his voice rough. You gave me. Daughter, you gave me life. He pulled her closer, his good arm wrapping around her. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, healing kiss of their first time. It was not the passionate kiss of new lovers. It was a kiss that was as deep and quiet and sure as the valley itself. It was the kiss of a husband and a wife. It was less desperate now. It was whole. The next summer was warm and mild. The ranch was healed, the pasture lands richer for the flood. The final scene is this. It is late afternoon. The sky is a high, aching blue. Cora is sitting on the porch, in the rocking chair, her mending in her lap. She is not the pale, thin girl who stepped off the train. Her face has lines, etched by sun and laughter and sorrow. Her hands are strong. She is beautiful. Hope, now 5, is playing in the yard, near the headstone that marks the past. She is making a small house of twigs. She looks up, her dark hair bright in the sun. Mama, she calls. Cora's hand still in her lap. Her breath catches. The word, it is not new, but every time, it is a miracle. Yes, my love. Go to the creek to find fine frogs. Just to the bend, Cora says. Where? I can see you. Yes, Mama, Hope says, and she scrambles off, her small, sturdy legs carrying her toward the water. Cora watches her go. She looks at her hands, resting on the mending. She looks at the valley, her home. She looks at the two graves, quiet under the pines, and at the new headstone, which points to the future. Eli is in the barn. She can hear the ring of his hammer, a sound of rebuilding, a sound of life. Her eyes fill with tears. They are not tears of shame or sorrow. They are tears of a fullness so profound, it is almost a pain. She whispers the words to the wind, to the valley, to herself. I am. Mother. In the distance, far up the canyon, the wind howls, a lonely, ancient sound. But here, on the porch, inside the cabin, there is only warmth, and there is peace. Thank you for listening to this story at the Wild West Campfire. We would love to hear where you are tuning in from in the comments so we can all connect. Please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts with us in English.